Hello everybody and welcome to today's special webinar event. I'm Terry Ryder, founder of hotspotting.com.au, and today I'm so excited to be speaking to one of Australia's leading property management experts, Jonah Tolley of the Rental Specialist. Today we're discussing some of the issues facing property investors today in their role as landlords. And those of you out there who are watching and listening, we welcome your questions and comments, and encourage you to type your questions into the Q&A panel or the chat box you see in front of you, or we can actually unmute you and handle it live if you put your hands up, and then we can address your questions as we work our way through the webinar. So the background to today's event is that, as you've probably been hearing and reading, some parts of Australia have very low vacancies at the moment, but others, notably in the inner city areas of our major cities, have large numbers of empty properties. And the question for many landlords is, what's the best way forward when past strategies aren't working and it's hard to achieve good rentals and acceptable returns? So that's our topic today. And now let me introduce my special guest, Jonah Tolley of the Rental Specialist. Joe, welcome.
Thanks, Terry. I'm so pleased to be here joining you today.
Perhaps just to kick things off, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the Rental Specialist and yourself and what you do.
Well, we are specialist property managers in Sydney. I established the Rental Specialists back in 1997. We were the first agency to be established in Sydney that just specialised in property management. I dipped out of the industry briefly to get some experience in other property-related fields, as in property development and construction, but I've always been managing property. I've been in the industry since 1991.
Okay, and as we were chatting just before we formally launched the webinar, you're very busy and busy for the right reasons at the moment.
I have been very, very busy. I didn't take any time off over Christmas at all. I worked straight through. We've been signing up a lot of new business, and we've also been leasing a lot of properties, and our days on market at the moment are fairly low in comparison to the rest of the market, because we're just doing things a little bit differently at the moment to get some results for our landlords, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, and I'd just like to perhaps emphasise for people watching and listening that you're based in Sydney and your business is a Sydney business, but I think many of the principles and situations and issues that we'll discuss today will apply equally to other parts of Australia, particularly those perhaps inner city areas that have the higher vacancies and not experiencing the opposite flip side of that coin that people in regional Australia are experiencing at the moment. So many of the markets, Joe, that you have your business in Sydney are very different from what many parts of Australia experience, which is very low vacancies, and it's really easy to get tenants. But many of your clients are in a different situation.
Yeah. Yes. So I manage property across the whole Sydney metropolitan area. So I'm getting a glimpse of all sorts of different markets within markets here in Sydney. I've got properties out in the western suburbs that are leasing really, really well and largely unaffected by the COVID pandemic situation that we find ourselves in. But I also manage a lot of properties in the inner city and the city fringe, and that's a completely different ball game at the moment. And even still, after almost a year, it's still quite a challenging environment for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think I always get frustrated with mainstream media. Often talks about Australia as a single property market, as if there's just one situation. And what we know to be true, there's always these different scenarios playing out. And you're experiencing in your business, even in just one city, you've got so many different scenarios. Parts of the market where vacancies are very low, it's easy to find tenants, and you're probably getting really strong rentals. Yeah. And then you've got other parts where they've got that opposite situation, and so you're dealing with all sorts at the moment.
Yes, precisely. It's look, I have to say that I take the vacancy figures with a little bit of a grain of salt as they apply to Sydney for that very reason, because there really is multiple markets here, and you can't really take a one size fits all approach when you're talking about vacancies here in Sydney.
Okay, I just pause for a moment. Sarah has just popped into the Q&A panel, just wanting to ask if there's a recording available later. Yes, there is. We always, Sarah, provide a recording of the webinar to everyone who's registered for it. So and that includes for those who aren't able to tune in live today. So we'll send a message to everybody either later today or tomorrow with the recording of the webinar attached. So for those people who are in those more difficult markets, Joe, where vacancies are high and it's not as easy to find tenants, how do you find investor owners are reacting? Are they accepting of the realities, or are some of them in denial?
There are some people initially anyway who were in denial. I have one client of mine who springs to mind immediately, had a property in a city fringe suburb, and their property was leased at, I can't remember now, it was around 740, 780, something like that a week. And it had been vacant 2 weeks, and they brought me in to take over the leasing. And they were quite steadfast on the asking rent that they wanted, despite the advice that they were receiving. And they endured a very, very long vacancy. And eventually they did find a tenant at the price that I had originally told them that they need to drop it to. So initially, at least, there was a lot of hesitation and resistance about dropping the rents. And I guess that's just human nature, isn't it? What I found is that when the landlords are actually listening to the advice that I'm giving them about asking price, and they listen to it, then we typically don't have problems with vacancy at all. It's one of the three. There are three fundamental reasons why a property doesn't lease, and pricing is one of them. It's the third fundamental.
What are the other two, just as a matter of interest?
Pricing, promotion, and presentation. So you need the 3 Ps of that's right, the 3 Ps of leasing. I did a video on it not so long ago, but you need to get those 3 things right in order to maximise your tenancy attracting to your property and minimise your vacancy. And they're all interrelated. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah, and so right now in some of those markets that you're dealing with, vacancies a little bit higher, it'd be more important than ever to get those right. So perhaps we could deal with each of those one by one, just to emphasise how important they are to get. You want to get all 3 right if you're going to maximise your chances of getting a tenant at a reasonable rental at the moment. Presentation. What I know to be true is perhaps far too many investor owners don't pay enough attention to that.
They don't. And I've actually put presentation as the second on the list. I like to focus on promotion first, because that's where you're initially attracting the interest of prospective tenants. And it's really, really important to promote your property properly. And when I say promote your property properly, what I mean is you need to actually find strategies that will enable you to stand up above the rest of your competition, especially in markets at the moment where it's really difficult to get that interest. And so I always encourage the best possible advertising that you can afford on the portals. And then if you're going to use photos, they've got to be really, really good quality photos. But that doesn't mean that you need to go and spend huge dollars on a professional photographer if you can't afford it. If you can, then absolutely go down that road. But you know what? I've taken brilliant photos using my iPhone with a wide-angled lens on it, and then I've gotten them edited later, and I've saved my clients hundreds of dollars. So you don't necessarily need to go down a professional photography path, although I do recommend it. And then, of course, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm actually conducting a bit of an experiment with some of my properties, and I'm not using photographs at all, and I'm simply leasing properties using video and virtual tour. And it's yielding exceptional results for my clients. So promotion is absolutely number one. Number two is presentation, because when you get that interested party coming down and having a look at your property, you don't want to turn them away. I invest time and I go to properties before the nominated inspection time. I open the windows, turn on the lights, spray air freshener so that when people walk in, it's nice and clean and fresh. And I just make sure everything's clean and tidy. You don't want to have these already qualified tenants that because they've pre-qualified themselves through your promotions, you don't want them coming down to a property and then being turned off because the place isn't presenting in its best possible light. And then once you've got those two things right, then you look at your pricing. So if you've got your presentation and your promotion spot on and you're still not attracting tenants, then it's got to be pricing. And so that's why I put pricing as number 3.
Yeah. It's interesting that you put it that way. I imagine a lot of investors, they just think about price and not about those other things. You've actually got it third on your list, get those other things in place with a great deal of attention to detail. And then you can start talking about what the pricing is. Yes,
pricing is always a factor, of course, but the pricing doesn't mean anything if you're not attracting the people to the property in the first place. You've got to attract the people to the property.
Yeah, okay. So I know when we're talking about this in the lead up to today that you mentioned that you have lots of case studies of people who are doing it well and people not doing it quite so well. Yeah. But could perhaps illustrate some of the points that you've just made in terms of the 3 Ps of presenting, promoting and pricing your property right.
Yes, I have actually I've got a fantastic case study and I've just done the deal this morning. I have a property in Kensington available for lease and it's one of these experimental properties that I was talking about. I haven't used any photographs whatsoever. I tell a lie, I've used one photograph of the front of the building and all I've done is use a video walkthrough tour and a 360-degree virtual tour. I had one inspection only. I had a couple of different people booked into that inspection and it was not an open home. Typically, I don't like doing open homes. I like to do private appointments, but that's my personal preference. I had one block inspection with a couple of parties attend and each of the parties said to me, that the video and the virtual tour made them want to come and have a look at the property because they'd already pre-qualified themselves that, yes, I like this property, it suits what I'm looking for. Now I'm just coming down to the property to actually confirm that what I've seen in the video and the virtual tour is real. The biggest complaint from tenants is that the photos are manipulated in such a way that it's no longer a true and accurate reflection of the property, or they've been taken so many years ago that they're no longer real or applicable. So one inspection, an application that afternoon, deposit overnight, bang, gone. 3 days on the market it was, and that's in Kensington, which is a really, really, really difficult market right now.
Yeah. So it sounds like a great case study, and if it's all done right, with the help of a good property manager, i.e. you can overcome the circumstances in the market and get a good outcome. Absolutely, you can. Absolutely. We're getting these outcomes, and this is not an isolated incident. We're getting really, really good outcomes because our clients are they're willing to listen to us and they're taking on board our advice. And I don't just rock up to a place and say, this is what you're going to get for, your rental return. We sit down and we analyse data and we have a look at the previous 6 months. And in the case of a unit, we will look at the unit, the building, then we'll look at 500 metres around, and then we span out and have a look at everything that's going on in the vicinity for the last 6 months. And together we're arriving at a rental asking price based on data, not emotion. My job is to eliminate the emotional attachment, because when people are emotional about the decisions they make, that they can make hasty decisions or decisions that are coming from a place of fear or anxiety or things like that. So my job is to just cut through all of that and let's just have a look at the data and let's have a look at the business case. That's it. That's my job. I want to go back to one of the points you've been touching on, and that's the emerging importance of having the virtual tour, the video presentation. We're hearing a lot about in the current sales market of people increasingly buying things, properties sight unseen. Are we starting to see that with people actually renting property sight unseen because of the technology allows that now?
Yes, absolutely. I've just leased a property in Redfern, another really difficult market, to some people who are currently living in Melbourne, and they're still there, and they're not flying into Sydney until next week. And it's all been done sight unseen via video, via virtual tour, and then I also did a FaceTime live inspection with them as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to remind people watching and listening that if you have questions or comments, please type them into the chat box or the Q&A panel. And also, if you'd like to actually ask your question live with and have a bit of a chat with Joe and myself, you can please put your hand up and we can unmute you, and we can do that as well. So, Joe, other case studies, those couple that you've given us are really fascinating and illustrate the points you're making beautifully. What else do you have for us?
I have another, so I said earlier that price was the third item on my 3 Ps scenario. So going back to a case study I touched on earlier in a city fringe suburb, I had a beautiful, beautiful property in a city fringe location, and it was previously rented at a very, very good price in the 740, 780, I can't quite remember. So the property came to my books when it was vacant. It had been vacant for about 2 weeks, and it was presented beautifully. I did my virtual tour, I did my video as well, and the owner was quite steadfast on the price. And no matter the cajoling, no matter the conversations, they just would not move because it was rented for $740 before, and darn it, I'm going to get $740 now. And as a result, they endured a vacancy in the order of about 4 months. So not only did they have a vacancy of 4 months, 16 weeks, when you think about a 16-week vacancy, each week is a 2% drop in your annual revenue. So they had a 16-week vacancy, plus they ended up getting $610 or $615 a week. So when you sit down and calculate the loss, it's huge. All because they were really, really steadfast on the price. So we had the presentation perfect. We were getting the inspections, no problems, but they just would not move on the price. So when I say we really do need to get all 3 elements working together, you can't have one without the other. You've got to have all 3 together, and you've got to have them all right. Yeah.
So I suppose if you sat down and did the sums, being fully leased at say 610 or 620 a week versus being vacant, getting nothing for all that period of time. And
I know.
I mean, it's just simple mathematics really at the end of the day. But
you're exactly right. It's simple mathematics, and this is what I like to say to my clients. We actually sit down and we run the maths with them. Look. And I always say to my clients, I would rather you have, especially in these really difficult markets, I would rather have you receiving 100% of something rather than 100% of nothing, because that just does not make financial sense whatsoever. Your costs are still occurring. You've got your council rates, water rates, strata levies. You've got all of those expenses. You need to generate an income of some sort in this difficult market, because when you become a landlord, you become a small business owner, and you need to start thinking like a small business owner, and you need to look at your bottom line. It's folly not to.
Yeah, I think that's a very well-made point. I think the other thing about running a business of any sort is, and it's it's a truism, a cliche perhaps, but very, very true, is that you have to be willing to spend money to make money. And I think that relates back to some of the points you're making about presenting the property well and promoting the property well, being willing perhaps to use a professional photography, just get all those boxes ticked to enhance your chances of getting the sort of bottom line that you're looking for.
Absolutely. And you're right, you do need to spend money to make money, but we're not talking about thousands and thousands of dollars here. And when you really think about the expenditure that's involved in promoting a vacant property, the photos that you're paying for, they will last you for 5 years. The virtual tour, providing you don't have any major renovations that take place, everything that you invest in that first vacancy, it should last you for a couple of years, and it's all tax deductible anyway. Not that that's a reason to spend money, but it helps. Yeah, it does help.
And we do have a question sitting in the Q&A panel, Joe, from James, which kind of relates to some of the things we're talking about. Asking about the best way to market a vacant house. Should we show pictures of the empty house or previous photos of the house fully furnished? That's not a bad question, but it does relate nicely to some of the things we are talking about.
It is an excellent question. I personally prefer unfurnished vacant properties. That's my own personal preference, unless, of course, the property is furnished and you can't do anything about it. But I like to have vacant properties. I want to showcase the whole of the property. I don't want things being obstructed by furniture. I want to give tenants. In saying that, though, it's two sides of the same coin, isn't it? When you've got furniture, maybe in a really odd-shaped property, it can assist you in visualising how you're going to place your furniture and that sort of stuff. However, if it's crappy furniture, I don't want it. I don't want it. I would much rather have it vacant, and I would much rather spend a few dollars and do some virtual staging. If it is one of those odd layouts that lends itself to some furniture to stimulate a tenant's imagination, well, then I'd rather still do it vacant and then just pay a few bucks and put some virtual staging in it rather than having somebody's awful furniture in it.
Yeah, I mean, my instinctive response to that was, furniture is a very personal thing, and it can really put people off unnecessarily.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yes, precisely.
And you touched on another point there that's probably worth discussing, and that is presenting a property with some professional touches. Sometimes people selling a property will bring in a professional to present it beautifully, to make it look like a house and garden centerfold kind of thing. Some of those touches, are they worth considering at times?
Do you mean as in getting a stylist in and just redoing the whole place?
Yeah, or is that just going a little bit too far?
Way too far. I have this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful client, and she is a property stylist, and her property became vacant, and she wanted to get in there and she wanted to do this virtual, real life styling and all for the sake of some professional photos. And I just went, you know what, no. I'm not letting you do that, because number one, it's a waste of money. Number two, it's a waste of time, and it's not the market to go and spend that sort of dough in right now. And we ended up leasing it within a week anyway. But it's for somebody who's not a professional stylist, that is just money not well spent. And I am a big believer in getting bang for your buck when you're spending.
Yeah, okay. Now, we do have one of our listeners asking how to actually go about getting a 360-degree virtual tour done. How do you get that done?
I do them myself.
Okay.
I have a special camera.
Yeah, the question is asking, should we get a company to do that? But you can actually do it yourself.
If you're a self-managed landlord, the only option would be you have two options. You can invest in the technology yourself, and it is readily available. It is not, anybody can get their hands on the technology needed to do this, or you can get a company. But you know what, I have, and the other thing is, of course, is that you need to, as a self-managed landlord, you need to find somewhere to host the virtual tour, because you can't host it on a normal website. But I do it all myself. Certainly the technology is out there and available for anybody to purchase, but the problem will come when it's time to host the video. But there are solutions for that as well. There are specialist websites. I don't know what the subscription fees are for other websites, but there are websites out there that people can subscribe to host their virtual tours.
Yeah, and it's probably an opportune time to mention that you you have a couple of special offers available for people who have registered for today's event, and one of them does relate to a virtual tour. So perhaps you could tell us how that will work.
It's through, so part of our marketing, we do a virtual tour and a video walkthrough as well. So what we're offering to our attendees today is a free video walkthrough tour for their marketing campaign. If they engage with the rental specialist before the 30th of April, they can apply that video tour voucher to their very first marketing campaign. Even if it's 2 or 3 years down the track, that's okay. But they will get that video walkthrough tour as part of their marketing package for nothing.
Okay. And we will be, as I mentioned earlier, in the next 24 hours, we will send an email to everyone who's registered for today's event. We will have a copy of the event, particularly for those who weren't able to attend live, but we also have details of that special offer included in what we send out to all of you. The next 24 hours. Now, Katie in the background making everything work. Ursula has her hand up. Is that still the case? Can we unmute Ursula and allow her to have a bit of a chat with us and ask her question live in the webinar?
And then I'd like to address Sarah's question as well, that she's been patiently waiting.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, Ursula. How are you?
Hi. I'm good, thank you. Interesting webinar. I just would like to ask a question. I'm settling on a property tomorrow in West Sydney.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's a 4-bedroom house, owner occupied. It was owner occupied, but it's in a very fairly shabby condition. So I am not afraid to spend some money. I've calculated what I need to do to make it nice and livable. Kitchen needs to be addressed, and the bathrooms, the usual. You know, it's very hot in that area, so I'm thinking about aircon, etc. But my question is, how would you go about advertising the house? My plan is to build a granny flat. I'm already, working on plans and a studio at the back, in the backyard. So for about 3 months, there would be work going on. And I would like to be upfront and, honest and I don't know whether, obviously I'll be spending some money to renovate, to make it nice and livable. But there will be some disturbance, of course, for the tenants. So my question is, how would you, be fair to people, and how would you advertise it? At the same time, I would like to have a tenant in while the work is going.
Of course. Okay. So for the main house, I wouldn't start advertising until such time that it's actually ready and you've done all of I call them lick and spits,
yes.
Before. So I would wait for you to complete all of that. And a good property manager, by the way, if you're hiring a property manager, a really good property manager should be able to help you with all of that stuff as well, just as a side note. But I wouldn't start marketing until all of those lick and spits are completed, and that way then again it comes back to the promotion and presentation, doesn't it? So I don't want to. I'm a big believer of being open and upfront with tenants, so I wouldn't be advertising saying to them, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, because that's just feeding them pipe dreams and thought bubbles. Until it actually happens, then it's not going to happen, if you know what I mean. But I would absolutely be completely upfront, not necessarily in the copy of the ad, but the first thing I would do if I were you is, if you've got the fence line, if you know where you're going to erect the fence line that separates the granny flat from the main home, I would do that as one of the first things on your list of things to do, because that way then we don't need to say to the tenant, oh, by the way, your backyard's going to stop here. There's already a physical barrier there that they can see, okay, this is the extent of my backyard, and that's what's included in the tenancy.
Okay, thank you.
So be very, very clear about that. But absolutely, I would say to them, look, we are doing some granny flat. We are building that granny flat in the back, and give them some time frames. Maybe you can negotiate, and you can do this, giving them an abatement for a short period of time if there is going to be major disturbances. When you abate rent, you don't need to then give them 60 days notice to increase it back, just as a little bit of a sweetener perhaps. Or you might think about dropping your asking rent slightly as a compensatory sweetener to get them in. But there are so many different ways to approach it, and certainly don't be frightened to do it. As long as you're completely open and upfront, the tenants will be okay. They really will. But only if you're honest and upfront. If you're deceitful or if you're hiding things, then they will get their back up and you'll have problems later.
Thank you. That's very useful. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome.
Thank you, Ursula, for coming on live and asking a question. I hope you found, I'm sure you found that answer really, really useful. Now, Joe, I think you wanted to address the question from Sarah, which relates to video tours, I think.
Yes, because we were talking about video tours, and Sarah has asked, do you speak in your video tours? And if so, how do you make it appear natural? So I thought that was a really great question. Can I just say, I hesitated and I sat on the fence forever before I started doing video tours. But I've had a look at the videos that I don't want to slag other property managers, but I've had a look at some of these videos, and I say it with inverted commas, and all they are is photos going in and out and then kind of dissolved together as they're moving through the home. And to me, that's just a waste of everybody's time and effort, and why would you even bother doing that? So the quick answer is absolutely. I talk through the videos. The way I do my videos is I like to, it's almost like you're next to me and I'm pointing out all the great things of the property, because you might not see what I see. So I will walk in and I will say, oh my goodness, I'll give a quick overview of the suburb. We're in St. Clair today and we have this fantastic 4-bedroom home, and the location is brilliant because we're right next door to a park, and around the corner, just a mere 2 minutes away, we have the daycare centre and the public school. Let's go and have a look. And so then I'm walking through the house and I'm telling you all these fantastic things about the property, and I'm making you want to come and have a look at it. That's my job. I'm making you want to come and have a look at this property as a tenant because you can envisage yourself living there. And then coupled with the virtual tour, bingo. Okay,
great. Thanks, Joe. There's a question there from Emma, and I'd like to say hi to Emma. We had a chat and a strategy session a few weeks ago. So welcome aboard, Emma. Can you see a question there, Joe, relating to specific? She's talking about Elizabeth Bay and Potts Point and some of the best ways about going about marketing there.
Oh, Emma, okay. So in small neighbourhoods like Elizabeth Bay or Potts Point, do you think using a local agent advertising the property in the window is useful? The short answer is no. Or is this digital COVID time, do you think it makes no difference to attracting good tenants? It absolutely makes no difference. Gone are the days, Emma, where your real estate agent needs to be on the next block in order to do a good job for you. Those days have been well and truly gone. They've been gone for a long time. The only thing is COVID has actually highlighted that fact. I've been running digitally now for 2.5, 3 years. That's the only way I've been doing it for the last 3 years. So I don't have a window display. My office is in a building up off the street, no window display. All of my properties are marketed digitally. Is it good for locals? Absolutely. But tenants are switched on these days. And do you know what? Tenants are hardworking people like you and me. And the last thing tenants look for properties to rent at home when they're in their pajamas. It's the last thing they do before bed. They're sitting in front of the TV on the couch, or they're sitting in bed and they're scrolling through the portals. That's where you get your tenants from now. You don't get people walking into real estate agencies asking for rental lists. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Joe, there's a question from an anonymous one. Do you suggest adding solar and water tanks to improve rental appeal for tenants in new builds? Is the cost worth it? Particularly talking about new estates. Do you have any thoughts on that particular subject?
I don't have any thoughts on that, other than to say the rebates that you generate for installing those items must be paid back to a tenant. So when these solar rebates first started making an appearance quite some time ago, there were many instances where the landlords were spending the money and then pocketing the rebates for the electricity being pumped back into the grid. But the legislation prevents all of that. Look, you're not going to get bang for your buck. Like I was saying earlier, when you're spending money on a rental property, you need to get an economic return on that money, and solar heating, it's not going to increase your rental return. It's a nice idea, and it might make you feel great, and yes, it's good for the environment and all that sort of stuff, but from a position of return on investment, I'd rather spend my money elsewhere, to be perfectly honest. But that's my opinion. If it comes ready-made with the builder, when you're buying a house and land package, well then fantastic. It's nice to put in the ad. But if you're retrofitting something, then I wouldn't do it. But that's just me. I wouldn't do it. And I wouldn't advise any of my clients to do it either.
It sounds a little bit, Joe, like extra things that, the more moving parts you have in a property, the more you're fixing things. I mean, yes. I'm always aware as a property owner with a swimming pool that it's not necessarily a positive. How do you feel about that from a rental perspective? I would say no, but what do you think?
They're a headache. You're right. Everything. That's another thing. Thank you. Everything that's in the property, you are absolutely responsible for. So yes, you're just opening the door for one more thing to go wrong, one more thing that you need to spend money on, one more thing that you need to service or repair or whatever the case may be. Yes, I just wouldn't do it. And swimming pools are an absolute nightmare. They really are.
Yes. I know a lot of people who used to own a home with a swimming pool, and when they move, one of their criteria is no swimming pool. They're just a money pit. And
yes, they are. Yeah.
And there's just a small window of time during the year when you're happy to have it when it's really hot weather, but the rest of the time. But when you're talking about investment property, I think that would be no. Andrew's got a question. Sorry, what?
That would be a no.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew's question, Joe, does your service include executive leasing? It's often furnished, may lease for a shorter time. Yeah, you can see the question, I'm sure. What do you think?
If so, do you have any thoughts on the issue? Yes, it does. I do offer a short-term, I don't really call it executive leasing, but it's a short-term rental scenario. Yes, I do, although it makes up a small portion of my portfolio. And what we're finding at the moment is there are a lot of people right now who have taken their properties away from the short-term rental market, the STR, and put them into the Long-Term Residential Tenancies Act, the long-term rental market rather, sorry. Look, I wouldn't buy an investment property just to put it on the short-term rental market as a potential investment strategy, although I understand that it can be an investment strategy. But COVID's really highlighted the how reliant you become on our borders being opened and people coming in and out of the city. And for me, that it's a really risky proposition, especially right now. And it will continue to be so until the borders open, really. And they're saying that that's not going to happen again until next year sometime. there are corporates who look for properties that are, you know, they can put their employees into for short periods of time. But other than that, if you're thinking of it like an Airbnb type proposition, I would just go no. Yes, it's great, but it's only great in certain markets, as we've seen. And then what happens is that, you know, our borders close and we get a pandemic, and then all of those properties fall into, you know, the CBD had at one point over 600 properties available for rent because they'd all come off the short-term rental market and onto the long-term market. And it kind of just, you know, there are still properties that are trying to be filled now. So yes, I like it. And you know, in the past, I actually rented properties myself and furnished them and then put them on the STR and you know, took a cream off the top and all that. I've done all of that myself. Would I do it now? No. No, give me safe and secure and stable any day, thanks.
So Sarah's come back with another question there about advertising on smaller portals like Homely. Do you think it's worth the time?
I do advertise on some of the smaller portals. I don't advertise on Homely. I've had a quick look at it, but nothing in depth. And I don't get, and you'll speak to any property manager and they'll say the same thing. They don't get the inquiry from those smaller portals. There's two main players and there's one really main player, and that's where people advertise, and that's where people go to look for the product that you've got available for rent, because we've been conditioned that way, haven't we? Yeah, which is kind of a shame, really, because, you know, those smaller portals like Homely and rent.com.au, they need our support in order to then generate the traffic. But because they're not generating the traffic, they're not going to get our support. So it really is this horrible catch-22 situation that I don't know how they'll break out of. But there's two main players. And then, of course, you've got Gumtree and Facebook and all of those sorts of things, but you only use those for very, very particular types of properties as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah, for your question, and for everyone with their questions so far. Please keep them coming. We've had some great questions, very much on topic, and it's helped us to get a nice flow going with the webinar today. I just wanted to switch course a little bit, Joe. We've been talking primarily today about people with properties in some of those difficult situations where you really have to work hard to get tenants. But other parts of the market that you're operating has the opposite situation, low vacancies and people lining up and competing. I just wonder whether there's a temptation or a tendency for landlords in those circumstances to get a little bit too greedy. You know, it's not necessarily always a great idea to absolutely squeeze the maximum rental you can get out of a particular situation.
You're right. There's plenty of markets here in Sydney that are just going fantastically well. And yes, the landlords will, there are some landlords out there who will try and squeeze every last penny out of a property. But ultimately the market, even though we have our 3 Ps on point, ultimately the market will tell you what the rent is going to be, and if you don't listen, you will suffer vacancy. And remember, every single week vacant is a 2% drop off your revenue. So you know, are you going to wait for $5? You know, if you're talking $50, well, then your property manager should be saying to you, well, it's not worth that much and you need to drop it down to this particular level. But if someone comes in, if I've got a property at $450 a week and someone comes in and offers $445, if my owner turns around and says, no, I'm not accepting that, well, I've got to think twice about whether they're the right owner for me to work with, if they're not going to actually listen to the professional advice that they're being given. It doesn't make sense to have a property vacant over $5, does it? So, but there are some people out there like that. To me, it doesn't make sense. But
just looking at it from another perspective, some of the properties that I have coming up for lease renewal, and the property manager saying, look, you can get a much bigger rental than you've been charging for the last 12 months. And I'm hesitating to, again, because I've got a really good tenant in the property, I want to keep them, and I don't want to create a situation where they feel they have to leave. I'd rather actually be a little bit more moderate in the rent I ask to keep a good tenant, because there's value in that. There's value in that continuity. What do you feel about that situation?
I agree with you. I would love a tenant to stay in a property for 3, 4, 5 years, because look, the way I do my job, and not everybody does this, but the way I do my job is I'm benchmarking the rent every 4 months. I'm not saying that every 4 months they're going to get a rent increase, because we can only increase once every 12 months anyway here in New South Wales. But my landlords are always going to know where their property sits in the market at any given time. If I've got a fantastic tenant, I want to keep them. I don't want my job is to make my landlords money. If they have a vacancy, they're losing money. And if they have a vacancy over something as petty as $20 a week, well, then that's just plain ridiculous. Because, yeah, you might get somebody paying an extra $20 a week, but you might have the property sitting vacant for 2 weeks in order to find that person paying an extra $20 a week. But then you're paying leasing fees, then you're paying advertising fees, then you're paying lease preparation fees. And maybe if you haven't done a marketing campaign for 5 years, you're going to have to update your photography and all of that sort of stuff. It doesn't make it doesn't make sense to me. So I would much rather have a tenant in there and just increase the rent. Keeping it slightly below market, if they're a really good tenant, is such a great way to just keep a nice, stable, optimized investment. Yeah, you might be a little bit under the market, $10, $20 a week, but you've got safety, you've got security, you've got stability, and you're going to have a tenant who doesn't want to move out.
The other aspect of that for me, Joe, is that if you've got a tenant who kind of has to move out because the rent's gone up and someone else moves in, that adds to the wear and tear on the property. When someone's moving out, someone's moving in, things are, there's always little points of damage, and it impacts on the property in another way.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right, and yeah, it all takes its toll, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Russ has got a question up in the chat box there. Would you consider current market around the CBD stabilised more or less at the moment, or has it improved at all, Joan? You find
it's gotten a little bit better. So from April through to about October, there were, as I was saying earlier, over 600 two-bedroom apartments in the CBD alone. Then when you throw Pyrmont into it, there was like 200 properties in Pyrmont and another 100 and something in Glebe as well. This morning when I had a look, there were 260 properties, 2 bedrooms in the CBD. So that's a marked improvement in the last several months. So that's good. Properties are still sitting on the market for a while, but at least you don't have that same level of competition that you had earlier when the pandemic first reared its ugly head. So it's getting better. The inquiry that I've experienced over the last, December and January has just been absolutely phenomenal for our agency. And I don't know yet. I have to wait and see. Was it just the December, January period? Because everybody likes to move either before Christmas or in January's, New Year, new beginnings, all that sort of stuff. So I just want to wait and see. It'll be really interesting to see what happens in February. But we've had a massive 2 months in December and January in terms of just moving stock off the rental market. It's been fantastic. So yes, it has stabilised, but it's still, I would say that it's still tricky. You've still got to get your 3 Ps right.
Warren's asking a question, Joe, about the length of leases. Is 6 month better, 12 month? What do you think? I guess it's a horses for courses to a certain extent, but what would your response be to Warren's question?
A year and a half ago, I would have said 12-month lease. But these days, I prefer 6-month leases, and not because I don't favour stability, it's because of the changes to the legislation as far as break lease fees go. And it doesn't make sense for an owner to offer a 12-month lease from the break lease fee point of view. There's no stability now in a 12-month lease. It's not as secure as what it used to be. The way the break lease fees are in the olden, I'll call them the olden days, 20 years ago, it was absolutely fantastic. The tenant had to pay their rent up until the day a new tenant started paying their rent, and they had to pay all of the landlord's releasing costs as well whenever they needed to break the lease. Then the law changed, and you could choose. You can do it the old way, which is my favourite, or you could do a 6-week break fee or a 4-week break fee, depending where you are in the lease term. So we had this choice, one or the other. I always went the old way. Now everything's gone, and it's a cascading scale of penalties based on where the tenant is in that fixed term period. And that's your penalty. Well, that's the tenant's penalty rather, and that's all you're entitled to as compensation from the tenant. So to me, it doesn't make sense to offer a 12-month lease when in the last 3 months, so not from month 9 to month 12, the penalty to break the lease is simply the equivalent of 1 week's rent. I'd much rather have them on a periodic lease where they have to give me 21 days notice, and I can plan that vacant property and get my marketing up to speed. As it is, 1 week, they don't even have to give me notice. Here are the keys, thank you very much, walk away. And the only penalty they've got in that last quarter of the tenancy is a week's rent. So it's just such a frustrating situation, and it doesn't make sense to me. So 6 months all the way. I'm happy for a tenant to stay in a property for 5 years, but the initial term, I'm happy just to have it on at 6 months.
Okay. I think the politicians, in their efforts to help people in a certain situation, i.e. tenants, they've forgotten, I think, in many states, Australia, the people on the other side of the coin, which is the investor owner. In many cases, is just an ordinary mum and dad investor, not a wealthy person, and their situation in this scenario has not been considered fully by the politicians and their responses, I think.
Yeah, you're right. But Terry, it's not just this situation. We've seen so many. I mean, look at the COVID temporary measures, the help, and I say that with a large degree of skepticism and cynicism, the help that landlords received during the whole COVID when we were dragged kicking and screaming to the negotiating table. I don't begrudge. We need to help people in times like this. However, we've got politicians door-stopping press conferences there. We're going to have moratoriums on evictions and all this sort of stuff. No regard, no thought to the consequences to landlords. And when you have a look at the tax relief in New South Wales, most landlords don't even have enough property to even accrue a land tax liability. So those people in particular got absolutely zero help whatsoever, and it's just ridiculous. So I'm very, very passionate about landlords' rights. So when it's just we are the forgotten part of the economy and it happens way too often as far as I'm concerned.
I think it springs out an assumption that out of touch politicians have that landlords are all incredibly wealthy. They own 15 or 20 properties, but of course the 75% of Australians who own investment properties own just one or maybe two, and they're
two
not
if they're lucky. Yeah, that's exactly. We are not I'm a landlord myself. I'm also a tenant myself, so I can see the same. I can see everything from multiple sides. But we are not the money bags that people think that we are. We're just making different choices with our lives. That's all. So it just frustrates me to no end.
Yeah. So we've almost coming up to the hour. We try to wrap things up within an hour, and it's gone quickly.
It's gone so fast.
I've had so many great questions from people engaged today, and that's sort of taken us off in a certain direction. Was there anything else that you wanted to impart to people that you haven't got to express yet because we're being distracted by all these wonderful questions?
Yeah, look, there is something actually, Terry. The leasing is just one component of being a property, being a landlord. Yes, I've talked a couple of times about the 3 Ps of leasing, getting your price, presentation, promotion in order. However, in equal measure, you need to then follow through and maintain the tenancy to a very, very high standard. Don't put the first tenant into a property that just shows interest. You know, be really selective about the tenant that you put in there and make them submit applications and do your checks and balances. And then on top of that, you then got to make sure that you've got all of your paperwork in order. Some people think, I might be a bit controversial here, but some people think that the lease agreement is the most important document that is part of the tenancy, but I would argue that the entry condition report is the most important part of the lease documentation that can be prepared. So spend the time and do your entry condition report properly. It will save you some headache when the tenant moves out. And then once you've got that, make sure you're doing your inspections. So many times I have landlords coming to me saying, my property manager hasn't inspected the place for 2 years. And I'm like, oh my God. I took over a property in Rockdale. It's undergoing renovations now, and I took it over from another property. The owner lives overseas. The previous property manager had the tenant installed in there for 12 years. And in that 12-year period, the poor landlord, the tenant, the property manager inspected the place once in a 12-year period. That is just atrocious. When a property, I get so upset for this particular client. When a property manager inspects a property, when they're doing their regular periodic inspections, I call them tenancy inspections. When a property manager does that, they have to do it at least once a year. I mean, that's just legislated, but they have to do it once a year at least. And, you know, it's an opportunity to, number one, build your relationship with your tenants, because it is a business relationship and you've got to build it. Number two, be proactive rather than reactive in your repairs and maintenance and upkeep of your property. Number three, it's an opportunity for you to have a look at your property and go, am I getting the right rent for this place? This poor landlord now has to spend $150,000 to bring the property back up to a rentable state. She is just beside herself, and my heart, I just feel so bad for her. It's just pure negligence on the part of the property manager, but it's just, oh my goodness me. Words fail me when I think about this poor lady. But so it doesn't end with just the 3 Ps, leasing the property. Once you've leased the property, now's your time to optimize your investment and keep it humming along really, really nicely. And that's where the true value of a property manager shines. A good property manager will have really good systems and procedures in place to make sure that your property is just really ticking over really nicely, like a well-oiled machine.
I think, Joe, this might be a good point to end on. What should people expect from their property manager, at the very least, in terms of what they'll provide, including those regular inspections to make sure the property is in good condition and being cared for by the tenant?
They need to be, for me, the absolute minimum is 2 inspections a year. That's the minimum. I do more than that, but the minimum is twice a year. As a landlord, I want to be receiving a written report after each inspection with photographs, letting me know how the tenant is keeping the property. I want to know what are the little problems now that I need to address so that they don't become bigger problems later. I want to know what the market's doing. I want to know in terms of rent so that I know, even if the tenant is already on a lease, I want to know, okay, the lease is up in a couple of months' time. I know the market's shifted. I'll have a conversation with my property manager then about when to increase the rent and by how much and all of that sort of stuff. I want to know when my lease is expiring so that, and I want to know what the intentions of the tenant are. We can't force tenants here in New South Wales to sign lease renewals, but I want to know what their intention is. Do I need to brace myself for a vacancy coming up? Does the tenant want to sign a new lease? If they do, what sort of period? I'm a planner. I want to plan these sorts of things. I want to know what's coming up. That's at a minimum. I want to read my statement every single month and see that the money's in my bank account. that's the bare minimum.
Okay. Thank you, Jo. Now, a couple of special offers today. Katie's actually put up in the chat box a download link for one of those special offers, which is tell us about the Landlord's Guide, Jo.
In March of 2020, the Residential Tenancies Act changed, and a lot of new laws came into effect. And those changes were overshadowed because it was the same week that we had COVID hit our shores, and the rental moratorium, eviction moratorium and all that sort of stuff was in the media. So the law changes were cast aside, but they were still implemented. So the Landlord's Guide to Residential Tenancies Act that I put together is just an overview of the major changes that affect landlords in a very practical way. For example, when we can charge water usage now, that's changed. When we can increase rent on a tenancy, that's changed. So they're just the real practical things that even self-managing landlords can read this and go, okay, I understand that. I've got a really good handle on that. So it's just a little guide to the basics. It's a comprehensive guide, and it doesn't cover absolutely everything, but it's the nuts and bolts.
Okay. And the other special offer you're making to people who are registered for today's event, we touched on earlier, is the virtual tour, and we'll be sending out details in the next 24 hours. We'll send a copy of the event, a recording, and details of those special offers to everyone who registered for today's event. So just in summary, I think it's been a fantastic webinar, Jo. I've really enjoyed it. We've had great engagement and questions from people watching and listening. And I've learned a lot as somebody who's interested in property investment and owns some properties. Attention to detail, important now more than ever. The virtual tour and how that's becoming such an important part of the promotion. The 3 Ps, with promotion first, presentation, and then pricing, and the a willingness to be willing to spend money, to make money, but not to go overboard.
No.
Yeah. So I think those are the standout points for me. And thank you again, Jo. I think it's been a great webinar. I think you've provided great information to people.
I have really enjoyed myself. Thank you so much. I tend to get a bit passionate and go off on little tangents, so I apologise for that. But I'm just really, I just love what I do. What can I say?
Yeah, no, I can see that. I think the content's been great. I mean, I've learned heaps, and I've been sort of around real estate for a long time, but it's been a great learning experience, and it's been fun to participate. So many thanks. Let's do it again soon.
I can't wait.
Okay, thank you, Jo, and thank you everyone for participating. Terry Ryder from Hotspotting.com.au signing off. Bye for now.